Hey guys, Master Xeon here, and in this video I'm going to be going over the process of how I made and set up this female torso using Blender and a little bit of ZBrush. So let's go ahead and jump in and begin. Alright, so jumping in. So for the next hour and a half I'll be just explaining to you all the workflow I go through in creating this. So I start off with a cube, of course, and just bevel, trying to establish the planar shapes that I'm trying to become more familiar with in the human form. So this head is probably number 17 for this month. In fact, my rejected tutorial list is a lot longer than my posted tutorial list lately, because I don't want to just, post crap or something that won't have a decent result. I mean, the bar for tutorials is of course set by Master Price and Blender Cookie. So I'm trying to up my tutorial skills to that level. But enough about that. So I always start off cutting and beveling and just trying to add geometry only to the areas that I need to, which works alright. This is something more of what I would consider a poly sculpt, because I'm thinking of it in the same aspect as if I was sculpting it. However, I'm using polygons. So it's like being able to add detail only where I need it and being able to control the edge flows whenever it's convenient. But do know that there's a time in which I go off camera, do a retopology of the face, and then proceed, which I felt that retopology may not have been important enough to record, seeing that it would take a moment. Ugh, sorry, I'm a little tired. I've been watching all these Andrew Price videos. And so what I'll do is I'll set my object mode to sculpt mode, and then just jump between sculpt mode and edit mode to just add details and put it together. So the speed that you're watching this is 300%, but when modeling with planar shapes in mind, a couple of important things to keep in mind is, GG is edge slide. I always say that in case you didn't know it. That's it again. The reason I say that is because I use it all the time. I slide edges at other edges in order to create the angles that I know are there, so I don't have to reduce the geometry. I can just do what I call reaffirming it. That's just me sliding it at it. So I start off always by trying to lock in the eye, lock in the mouth, because I know the nose is somewhere in between. And there's a couple of other videos I have recorded too that I meant to release that I haven't yet. One was about doing a dynamic sculpt of a shark man using a combination of Blender and Moto, which I finished, but I just wasn't pleased with the overall result. So I'm trying to work my way more towards a more artistic derby kind of thing instead of just how-to videos on how to do stuff. Kind of like, Fang Zhu. So just move it in, thinking about the silhouette. I'll quad it when I can. But most importantly, make sure there aren't any doubles, because doubles can be frustrating. Cut, cut, dissolve, cut, and connect. So even though I don't really care too much about topology, there still are a couple of loops that I just always go for, just because they do kind of lend themselves towards the shape on some of these interior pieces, like the mouth, muzzle, and the nose area. I always try to go for that particular loop. And another thing about this video is that I do, of course, use hair fibers in this one instead of my usual polygonal hair, but because I thought maybe it redeemed itself in this, this 2.68 release, but hair is still too damn slow. I was looking at 30-minute render times by the end of this video, so that's one of the main reasons I ended it. However, I did want to do a photo projection, so I may go back and do that. It's just for the final model. But for the most part, this was a model that I think throughout the process I kind of lost confidence in and was wanting to actually abandon it at one point and just, call it quits on it. But instead I felt I should stick in there and find out what it was that was making me feel that way and find what features weren't natural and try to neutralize them. So while I did a so-so job at it by the end of this video, I don't feel that the result was absolutely perfect. So back to the drawing board to work on my workflows. And of course just add a little geometry in there since it just connects to itself to give some more definition to the nose. And more poly sculpt and slide some edges down and try to harden up some forms. But nothing too serious at this stage. Nothing much to say here, just mix and verts to try to isolate some pieces and try to just keep some looping geometry happening. And of course that's by quadding it and making sure there's no doubles, because the knife tool loves to create doubles. But I'm also wanting to, of course, neutralize endgons as I'm modeling, because endgons and poles will look very strange during smoothing. So you'll see some of the caveats of this particular modeling style later on in the video whenever even in smooth mode with Subsurf 2, there's still just bumps and notches, which in the end prompted me to do a retopology. Most of the time I'm able to reaffirm my way into getting it smooth, but in this one I end up having to just do a final retopology. But with the upcoming the Z remesher, I may not have to do as much retopology in the future. But retopology has never been something I've had complaints about. I've always actually liked manually dictating my geometry absolutely until I get to the airs, then it becomes painful. More shaping with loops being inserted only to add additional detail. And so for the eyes, usually what I do is I'll insert a sphere, get the sphere where I want, and then just use Phase Project to project it to the destination. So that is precisely what you'll see me do here after creating the goggle loop for the eye area. And that was me trying to put in a David try to simplify the eye, but instead I decided to just go through all the manual shaping of it. So I'll drop in a sphere, quad off the poles at the end, and probably the way that I put in these spheres may be my indicator as to why my eyes are always so large. But it's something I get better at. I do get a lot of live critique. I'm usually in a chat room in that Google Chrome window talking to other artists at the same time, getting live feedback on what things I can improve, which, if you really want to know, is probably the secret to my improvement, is the collaborative efforts of many artists that I meet up with daily who are skilled in their particular craft and are working in a professional field that I'm able to get advice from, as well as insight into the more professional end of 3D that I never even gave consideration to before. But in order to prevent too much traffic, I'll keep shush on that. So usually what I'll try to do is I'll insert a loop and then put another loop behind it to cut behind it to give the eyelid, but as you can see here, it gives it kind of an unnatural look. But I am trying to finish the form and then go back and then do some refinement. So I tried putting that loop there. That loop was a mistake. I tried putting that edge there. That edge was a mistake, but I ended up correcting it. So more cuts to try to just close the form, because these end guns I don't think really form a shape. So gotta get something done about that. From this point I turn on auto merge editing, and by sliding edges at other edges I'm able to merge things together. So usually what I'll do is, if I'm modeling something hard surface, I'll apply a level of sub D, slide erroneous edges at other edges to get rid of them, and then keep that additional division and use it more intelligently to handle the detail that I'm trying to put into something. But here at this point I'm trying to bring out a neck, so that means there's a couple of cuts and deletes I can do that'll allow me to customize the neck area. But the edge flow isn't its best, so I try to cut and in the end extrude it out to get a circular edge flow. and just trying to shape the neck. But my definite goal is to flesh out the form immediately, because having a cylinder extruded out of a head just does not help add to the form. So I'm trying to just simplify things, do a little geometric management, do some reshaping to get the neck in and indicate the back of the head, which I was lacking. And so things still look a bit unnatural, but you know, we're not very far into this and still have a long ways to go. So there's still something unnatural about the head that I'm noticing, but I can't quite put my finger on it at this point. I mean, it's lacking air, so, you know, that doesn't help either. But there's still something I need to work on here. But I wasn't sure what it was, so I continued trying to just deal with some of the out of control triangles and just round off some of the geometry. And more shaping. Just trying to get the bottom lip to go back under the top lip. And bring it just a dimple to indicate a smile. This area is a little fragile, can't do a whole lot of smoothing here. So I slide it up, slide it down, and you'll see that interplates edges between other edges. I cannot explain how much I enjoy using that particular aspect of Blender. In other applications, sliding is not so easy. and knife through while pressing Z to wholly knife it. Smile alarm. So right here, everything's still pretty blocky, but just beveling and proportional editing to try to indicate the clavicle. Really hate to give any guidance at this point because the initial form is so off. And to make it even worse, I attach breasts to that monstrosity, which I struggle with for quite a while. But in the end, I get them under control after being critiqued and pointed out that they were indeed gazongas. So drop in the sphere and make it roughly the size of the head so I can array it. And this is just a head guide I was using to just basically sanity check myself throughout the modeling process to make sure that I wasn't going overboard with the proportions, since I am using orthogonal most of the time that I'm modeling. And so to attach these to the chest, I had to use one of Blender's cooler and newer features called Knife Project, which I'm a big fan of. It just keeps getting better and better. When this tool finally does what it's supposed to do, which is not very far from now, you will be able to select a loop or a curve externally from your object and then click this button. It will project that onto the surface with like as if it was knife. So it's like knife cutting another surface into it. So a really quick way I see once I fully integrate into my workflow to just add objects to other objects. So I tested here. Unknowings to me, those are regular sized breasts, but indeed those are very large gazongos. But no worries. So now comes the part of attaching the neck to the head. Not too difficult. Using the power of F2, I can just select an edge and just F my way all the way around the model. F it up. Gotta love this particular enhancement to our modeling system. Now, as a person who is now learning 3ds Max and is able to model in Modo and uses ZBrush and experiments with 3D Code, all these softwares, I could still come back and say to you guys that Blender's the best at what it does, which is everything. But as far as modeling, probably no other program can beat it. Once you get down to shortcut keys, it's game over. And from there, you see Knife Project worked out very well. I was able to extrude out, delete it. But connecting isn't going to be so easy. And at this moment, they became even bigger. And the connection process I thought wouldn't be so easy until things got off center. but I run through and I try to connect them anyways. For this particular part, I do want the geometry to somewhat be alright, but don't look so much at all these tries and end guns as me failing at modeling. Look at it as using modeling in a way that's almost alternative to dynamic topology. Because while I enjoy it, sometimes it frustrates me. And usually I like to do Blender projects in Blender and other software projects in other software. So having to export in order to do trivial things from Blender is indeed very frustrating. But I'm sure that all sounded like a bunch of nonsense. So with the level of sub D added, things begin to get serious. And we start to just shape things up. The lips undergo several renditions before I finally achieve a look that I perceive to be, what's the word, cute, I guess. But this isn't that moment. And for this particular model, I did choose to go inside and put the mouth bag because, my models are incapable of opening their mouths most of the time, and I don't even bother to put teeth in them, so I'm trying to make it more developed. So usually what I'll do is I'll extrude in a couple of times, build the rest of the bag, and then it'll just be a small segment in which I will make them overlap. And so for this video, unfortunately, once again, I decided to not go through and model an ear, but instead just copy and paste one. So usually I just have an assets file in which I use ears. However, today I also decided I should probably make a new ear to start dropping in on these models, since part of my critique is something about my ears. So I've done a study on the ears, and now I may be coming back and doing a video about it, but I feel that process is rather time consuming as far as videos go, and sometimes I don't want to watch a video that's 30 minutes long. Like I know earlier I was waiting on a render, and while the render took 30 minutes, I didn't want to watch a video about how to paint hair in Photoshop for 30 minutes. I felt that deserved an attention span of maybe 5 minutes. So as you can see, I've added a level of subdivision because the initial levels weren't enough, but by shrinking the levels I was able to just bridge the edge loops and just get a smooth connection. Not very smooth actually, so I ended up having to do some shaping, getting it to work out, but I'm not too worried. Like I said, this is a poly sculpt, so it's not intended to be rigged or animated. It's just, in the end, it's going to have to be retopologized. I just like to establish the form a little quicker. And so more smoothing, but no deflating. It's funny, my girlfriend came and she saw it and immediately was lamenting that she looked like she had implants, so I knew I probably went overboard if that's the first thing that someone mentions, especially when you put so much work into specifically the face. You don't want them to be lamenting on the body. And so, in my understanding, the forehead is made up of 3 planes, so I always try to establish those 3 planes roughly and then smooth it a little. And there's my inner loop, and I try to just smooth it out at the ends, and astonishingly enough, it does work for me, and also allow me a moment to just push the eyeballs back in where they're supposed to be, because at some point they became horribly off and I'm not aware of it. So people always tell me that the outside of the mouth should reach up to the middle of the eyeball, but usually I make it reach just to the end of the eyeball, which is probably one of my modeling mistakes that I need to correct that I'm seeing here in the initial stages, but just something I wanted to point out there. So there's this artist named Hazardous Arts that if you don't know who he is, just Google him. I'll probably put his link in the description, but he is a phenomenal character artist. And my goal is to someday understand and be able to emulate his style of modeling. But his practice always preaches to spend about 20 minutes focusing on the eye, then the nose, then the mouth, then the ear, and then just rotate. Meanwhile, there's other artists like Zach Petrock who prefers to work on every aspect at the same time, just jumping in 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there, just jumping around the whole model till it all comes to completion together. But, with these sort of things, I'm starting to see that you can't really, just emulate, just acquire and just use anyone's workflow. You have to adopt it to your own skill set. So yeah, a lot of the techniques I see, I always just modify them to my own skill set. Same with sculpting and modeling practices. Like a lot of stuff I do with modeling now is stuff that I see other programs do with sculpting. Because ZBrush has really put a lot of emphasis into their hard surfacing system. So in the last couple of iterations, I've seen it go through a lot of phenomenal improvements, and some artists much better than me have made techniques that are worth emulating even in your own software. So being exclusive to Blender really only hurts you as an artist, limits you in the end, is something I've learned. So with the eyes, I usually tend to swing a loop at another loop and get it almost there to just give that crease at the top. But with a lot of my detail, people tell me I need to smooth it out and soften it since it is the female form. So I try to do that. Also try to give the the top lip an overlap on the bottom lip just slightly while pulling in straight pieces. So at this point I thought the model was looking alright. Trying to give indication of the collarbone. And work on some of those cuteness features that can only be achieved from the side. and just puffing up some sunken in features. So while I do spend a lot of time obsessing with the boobs and trying to get their shape right, I assure you I'm not a breast deviant or anything like that. Just trying to get the model to look natural and attractive, because that's a big thing I see in a lot of 3D models is, they're modeled, they're not attractive, not someone you would want to meet. I always tell people that. I want my models to look like someone you would want to meet. Oh yeah, that was another file. So I decided to make some adjustments to the whole front area of the face. Since I'm doing this by eye with no references, um, I got to make sure that my proportions are correct and that things are being indicated correctly. But we're getting through this. I know these tutorials are getting a little long these days, and that's something I'm trying to work on, but I'm also trying to cram more into them instead of making large multi-part series. I'd rather it just be just 6 hours sped up to 2, just with a decent explanation. I mean, I assume all of my viewers already have the basics. I mean, G for grab, S for scale, R for rotate, as it starts in every Blender book in existence. So, I'm pretty sure that now we can start speeding up some of these videos a little bit. But I mean, an hour to model a cup, sheesh, come on. I don't have that kind of time. I mean, one day I'm going to be turning these videos into PowerPoints, where I'm just going to show you all stages of the model and just point at things that are just keynotes. But we are getting through this, and I'm almost to the segment where I'll actually export it to another program. So I actually included that video of this in here as well, instead of just popping up with a better looking model. But I didn't do any of the texture poly painting there. It would have just been too easy. I just wanted to just take a break from Blender sculpting tools, because Blender sculpting tools are good, but they don't feel like they're grabbing anything. They just feel like I'm touching air. I mean, I'm not, expecting force feedback, but if you use other applications, you'll know what I mean. Sometimes Blender just doesn't feel very solid during the sculpting, but you can get the job done. But I remember I used to go in with the grab brush, and things would always just be pulled out of control for me. So underneath the eye on the right side, there's a lump. That lump is something that's caused by my edge flow. It's not going to be easy to fix, but I try to fix it several times. And I do fix it in the end, but I just wanted to point that out. So that's, one of the caveats of having a smooth mesh with, ink-on tries and pulls, just galore, just letting, things go haywire. I mean, look at that. I try to run an edge select, and that doesn't even work. So I duplicate it, press P to separate, go in, add a solidify, and using a knife, and K, and Z, I cut all the way through, and bevel, add another one, so that way it separates it, and now I have something to cover those. But there's doubles. There's a lot of doubles. that's sharp enough. And so I lower the view lens to be 80 because it's a more flattering view for the human face instead of the usual 35, which kind of makes everything look like they're about to be sucked into another dimension. And sharpen up the lips a little bit. And 1000 by 4000, make that 2000. And for the first time, we'll be looking at a basic render. Of course, jump over to GPU because CPU is just too damn slow. And so in the forehead there is a horrible Klingon ridge happening. Like, please kill me now. And I attempt to fix and alleviate it. But those sort of things just cannot be fixed with that sort of geometry. It's a mess. You just cannot fix it when it gets to this point. So really all you could do is do some reaffirmations, slide some edges, puff face, Alt S with proportional, try to smooth it with the sculpt. I'll try every option. But really what it comes down to is just locking down the area, checking the interpolation between each of those edges that are in the middle. A little loving and smoothing. Bam. 3 knots just appeared with that stroke, but I wasn't aware of it at that moment. But I see it now. But I'm still fighting this nose area. So what do? The easiest thing is to go in and just fix this scandal. Bam. Empty. By just doing some direct bridging, I'm able to set the direct angle that I want in this intersection. And then just using a couple of triangle tricks, able to just close it all off. So modeling is something that is probably one of my favorite things to do, period. Just because of the joy that you can get in solving a puzzle, especially one that you caused yourself. But that's the end of part 1. So next we'll go into part 2, where, alright, fine, I'll just keep going. Just kidding. So really, time for ZBrush. So here's the head imported over to ZBrush, and I just come in and just make a couple of changes. The eyeballs are actually transposed into its new location, so you'll see me deal with that for a while. So with this particular matte cap, you can see some of the bad transitions happening inside the face, and I'll just add a couple of levels and smooth that out, and then use the trim dynamic, which is Blender's polish brush, and just fix some of the forms. Some of the advantages of using this to sculpt with instead of Blender is ZBrush does have a very robust material cap system, matte cap system that um, doesn't use a lot of overhead on the CPU and allows you to focus more on just the form and shape of your model instead of the technical aspects, which is what Blender is mainly aiming towards, I guess. So you draw a couple of meshes, kind of visualize the hair, and use Transpose Master and move all of the features to new positions. And so I don't spend very long. I just do a little bit of reshaping, just trying to get a nicer look out of it. And so, by exporting it, I was able to just kind of see it in different light and just get some things corrected. So just quick rotation. As you can see, the back of the head is still undefined, but just putting hair on it. And I just do a couple of rotations with different matte caps. And so now you see me dealing with the the old head. So I'm going to go in and try to salvage the breast area and just try to scale and reduce it while looking at pictures of breasts on the internet. For reference, of course. And just smooth out the transitions and try to have it overlapping on the skin. Try to indicate this area where, the chest connects with the arm that is not going to be existent in this tutorial. But from the side, these boobs have been through a war and a football game and 47 kids, which means that I have to get in there and do some smoothing on them. Hopefully in Blender 2 point whatever, they will let us just put our own matte caps back on the models. I mean, we can do it if we go in and use GLSL textured mode and set it in images and base it to normal, but that's kind of a bunch of work, especially when they have a little menu for it. They could just let us up in and put our own customized matte caps in. I mean, I can even imagine modifications being done to the paint system that would allow us to just draw our own based off of materials we create in the material panel, but that's something for another day. So I wanted to indicate the back a little more, so I tried to dig into the spine and do a little bit of indicative work to the trapezius and scapula, but I don't want it too defined so it looks like a creature. These things were a pain. Like, if I wanted to make breasts that were best I mean, if you ever need breasts that are the result of being bested by cancer, come talk to me, so I could give you a deformed parent at Jeffy. Okay, so at this point, I'm taking my retopologized head and attaching it. So my geometry is smooth and clean and beautiful. Alright, so someone just showed up, but continuing. So at this point, I make a duplicate and go through the usual of course, running the holy sword through it by pressing Z to cut completely through the geometry, and then pressing Control B to bevel and adding one bevel iteration, and deleting that, adding a solidify modifier. But as you can see at the top, the edges are a little rough. So I'll just select that and just extrude it up, which is kind of a hacky way to get away with it, but that is the choice I chose. Also use the remove doubles with a higher threshold, so that way it just removes any geometry that's close to each other to somewhat simplify things. Look at the model from the front and hit rendered view. And so now we're taking our first look at what it's looking like here. And so I began just playing with the shader. You already know the usual process. However, this time I decided to try to emulate some SSS using the translucent shader. And so with the translucent shader, I wanted to add very little of the dark red translucency to the overall shader. So I lowered it down to a darker maroon, so that way it don't only show behind the ear and then the eye socket. And then just added that on top of the black to just see how it would look on the harshest of skin. And by setting up a mix shader using a layer weight, I was able to make certain areas in the back darker and areas in the front lighter, or vice versa, so that way there wouldn't be as much back and front scattering. So if y'all see my videos, y'all know usually the first thing I do is make a dirty map to just do some variation by multiplication on the skin. However, unbeknownst to me is I named that call instead of dut, and so therefore it's not even modifying it, it's not doing anything. But I don't know that, but I'll discover it later. So just defining the mouth bag and closing that up so there's no more translucency issues here. So the shader looks a little complex, but you know, you saw me put it together. Most of it's just multiplying on the diffuse to try to get more complexity. So now, I'm trying to put the glossiness in there. And the darker I make it, the less of it that will be added to the actual material. So there's an easy way to control that stuff per specularity, or you know, per diffuse, and not have to deal with all of it in the same shader. So it does come in handy. Alright, so to get the texture of the skin, the noisiness of it, I went ahead and just drew in a noise and raised the threshold. I tried playing with the normal to get a bit of a skin normal texture to map on it, but instead it ends up making the render times a little long, so I end up just not going with that on all of them. And so I just let it render for a moment. That way, you know, get a drink, come back, get a good look at it. So I'm dealing with here. More awkward silence. And more rendering. But I think I stop it before it gets to 1,000. Bam. Never let it get to 1,000. I'm not Andrew Price. So I don't be rendering for 5,000 samples. Every time I try it, I'm just can't be without my computer for that long. So now I try to do a color map. So with my current level of skin of character modeling and texturing, I always just make the cheeks on females a little pink. Same with the lips and the nose. Except now I've realized that the area under the nose is a little dark. So I'll isolate the lips and paint them. And of course, try to smooth out the transition a little bit. Vertex paint is one of my favorite things in Blender. I feel that it has some very underutilized power, especially with how easy I'm able to conjure it up in cycles, except for this crap. I hate it when this happens. Whenever it just kind of goes around a normal and just paints a plane. Because the translucent shader was adding too much to the render time, I went ahead and removed that, or temporarily just hooked the diffuse directly up. And now just adding in the color. There we go. Good neutral, so-so skin color. And just go ahead and make some glossy eyes. And put a sky, which I didn't like the way the transitions looked there, so I go ahead and just went with a HDRI. I go through quite a few of my different probes. I try to go with it like cloudy sky, play with the values. Did not like the lighting information I was being given there. And so finally I ended up just going one of my free Blender Cookie HDRIs and just turn off the background. And so I duplicate an edge loop to break off and then form into the eyelashes. And so for eyelashes, usually I'll just extrude them out and just go on Google, look up fake eyelashes, and then just map them on. Since fake eyelashes usually look like something you can already put on a UV map versus real eyelashes that are stuck to someone's face. And so after finding a picture of eyelashes on the internet, let's go ahead and just set them up to the UVs. I mean, I could have drew them, I could have used particles. Those all would have sucked. It's just easier to just use polygons. Alright, and so with eyelashes and eyebrows at least, even proxies, is definitely adding an element to the model that makes it capable of being trusted. So I try to set up some shape keys to give a smile, but it ends up looking very unnatural. Even though right here I try to make it look natural. So I duplicate this and decide to turn this into polygon hair. So my goal is to just, take areas that I liked, extrude them out, and just keep it connected to the same base. And the polygon hair is probably what I'll stick to in the end. However, I do end up sticking with particle hair for this, but I think the polygon hair, I was actually onto something. And so I make this polygonal hair, and I even try to go even further and make some um, curls to go in there. So this is something I'll probably have to come back and do in a future video, but I've come up with some great ways of making curly hair in Blender, just using polygons and curves, and even curves and just tapering it using a Bezier circle. But you'll see me go through that anyways. So we are nearing 110 minutes, so we are almost to the end here, but continuing along. So I end up just using the curve constraint to make it go along a path, and then use all sorts of tricks to try to get it into the hair, but I end up realizing that it's a lot of work and the face is looking pretty good, and maybe I should just try particles again. I always hate on particles. Maybe I should just give it another shot. I gave it another shot. Let me tell you, no more particles for me for a while, at least till I figure out a workflow. I was going to try actually rendering the hair in Blender internal, saving the hair as EXR, then compositing it over to Cycles render, and just bypassing hair renders altogether. But that would make my camera angle absolute, and also that would be a bit tedious and kind of backwardsy on the workflow. So I try to go and use a straight ahead kind of system. So now I duplicate it and just make some hair. So while I know how to make good hair, I still try to just take shortcuts. And you'll see me do it a couple of times throughout this. However, I do get it right, get it more right near the end. So basically, whenever it comes to hair, you want to probably lay it in layers and just tune each of them to perfection before just putting them all together. And that way, you'll find that you can get something done a lot easier with a lot less hair than you initially thought was required. And while that sounds crazy, I'm confident that that is what I've been missing this whole time, is that I'll add, 1,000 strands, comb it, use children, freeze my computer, or something like that. So now what I try to do is add like 40 strands, comb it, use 100 children, and then add another layer on top of that with those children directly filling up the space that's left. So, systematically covering up the entire head instead of just allowing them to just run rampart. And then just hoping that the magic density will fill it in, because it doesn't. So I'll lay in a strip, kind of in the scalp area. Like I said, my workflow for hair could use some work, but I mean, it's the same philosophy I've been trying to apply to my polygonal hair as well. So I'll just extend it out, comb it, see how it looks. Looks dumb. Cut, cut, comb, comb. Lower my emitter, lower it more. Just turn that off. And there's my first piece of hair. Or my second piece of hair. So I forgot to put the little patch that goes down in the front, so it takes me a moment to realize that it's not looking natural, as well as the fact that the hair is looking kind of zapped, kind of fritzy, like it hasn't been taken very good care of. So I try to go in and make the hair a little thicker, but I realize that that's something that's as a result of the viewport rendering. Because it isn't like that after you give it 500 samples during the rendering stage, like you can see here. I don't like that area or that area, what the hell is that? There's a part missing, what's up with this hair? The transition. These are all things that I found wrong with this particular render, that part, whatever. I'm done with that. No more best adjustment. Now it's just getting this face done because, I've been at this for about 4 hours now, or about 3 hours at this point. 4 hours by the end of the video, though. So, there's still some things I need to nail down, but definitely pulling up the chin, getting the mouth to look a little more natural, are high on that priority list, as well as deepening the eye socket to try to, give a more adultish look instead of youthful. And because my geometry actually has a proper edge flow, or at least as good edge flow as I'll try for, there shouldn't be any more crazy, just strange bumps in the surface like I was pointing out earlier. And I continue shaping the nose. And so just slide that to just re-harden up those eyebrows. So here's a point where I realize I do need to finally add in this final segment. So I usually just give it 20 hairs, cut all the hairs off, then just use the add brush and just add a row, comb it, give it a little bit of length, comb that, so it's kind of a fox, kind of bushy hair. So this is the part where I decide to play with the clumps, see what I can do. Also add a little amplitude with the curl to just add a little more visual interest to it and maybe hide my mistakes. But on the opposite end, I clump them together and give them almost the opposite kind of style. There we go. Now we're adding in the curve. But I was trying to find something that's not so Pepe Le Pew. But the back just needs to be left alone. So I decided to lower the hair and pull it forward a little bit. Just delete that thing. And I'll just set that to be 150. Turn on indirect lighting, shadow, AO, and normal, and just render it out. So this is the render I'm looking at. Kind of noisy, but I got my sample, my AO, and even though my AO unfortunately shows the ambient occlusion of my model as a model, and not with transparency taken into account, that's something that I unwittingly still composite back into my image. So usually, first thing I'll do with the cycles compositor is just remultiply my shadow into the image at a better intensity, because I think cycles kind of weaken shadows automatically, so I like to instantly add a little hardness to them, as well as use the normal with the color ramp to control an RGB curve for some basic rim lighting in certain areas. Then with the AO, I'll just tune it till it hurts, and then multiply it back into the image. And I just think it adds a little more fill into the image. So the next thing is to throw in a normalize, which will give me a black and white mask going away from the camera, which will allow me to just add certain colors to come in from other sides. So usually I'll inject it with a little bit of blue in the back, then in the front, possibly inject it with a little green, but not before I throw in a color ramp to play with the intensities. So I was thinking about just multiplying in that Laplace effect that you saw me playing with back there, but it was just too ugly to have any use in this render, so I ended up not going with that. And so this is what the render looks like. And here's what the composite looks like. So the result's much better. Sometimes I have a habit of keeping what I get out of the render and not doing any compositing or color grading, knowing that those are things that are just needing to be done in order to get the image to look correct, because the render engine never is honest, but it is something I'm working on. So now I'm modeling an eye, or better yet, just cutting the eye in half and just importing one of my mini eye images to just be the eyeball. Usually I have stock eyeballs that I now throw in models to reduce the amount of time it takes for me to go through these tedious processes, especially modeling so many humans all the time. But here you'll see me just make one from scratch, add a UV, and even though it's kind of repeating, it doesn't matter since it's not going to be showing. And here we go. Now with eyeballs, it'll have a better more filling to it. We'll just put a glossy clear coat on top. Now whenever it comes to making a glossy clear coat that's on top of your eyeball, there's a lot of different ways that artists do this, but in cycles it's important to keep in mind that the glass shader cannot be used at just the glass without it being maximum between the shadow and the refractive. So if you don't know what I mean, you'll see in just a moment. Right now, render it's dark. The eyeball underneath it's dark. That's because it's receiving shadow. So what I need to do is make sure that the glass is glass and there is no shadow, like real glass. And this is all there is to it. Alright, so I'm hoping that the audio for this video actually syncs up, since I may have encountered some issues previously, but continuing on. So with the eyes, I'm just trying to flatten it up a little bit on the front to just try to control the specular reflections that it's getting. And we take a look at our model, and the render times are just longer than ever. So hit F12, get a finished render, and the result is looking pretty good. However, the render time was 20 minutes, so I'm not very big on particle hair again. I'll hate it. And there's my nodes, and here's the initial result. And so that pretty much brings us to the end of this video. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and happy blendering.